All right, welcome to this month's TCO series webinar on WSUS and SCCM Total Cost of Ownership Study. I am Jay Goodman. I'm a Strategic Product Marketing Manager here at Automox, and today I'll be taking you through the Total Cost of Ownership Study from Sedulo Group. First, before we get started, just a couple of webinar housekeeping items. First of all participants will be muted to keep the audio clear. The webinar is being recorded and all registrants will receive a recording of the webinar after we're done today. We will do a Q&A at the end of the webinar. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. During the webinar, feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And like I said, we'll try to address as many of those questions as we can before we run out of time today. All right, as far as the agenda, we're going to take a look at the study. I'm going to give a quick overview of it. Then we're going to talk a little bit about managing remote teams and the findings from the study on that. Then we'll talk about the cloud-based patching value and benefits. And then we'll go into a little bit on the unrecoverable costs of on-prem tools like SCCM and WSUS. And finally, we'll wrap up with how Automox can reduce your costs now. And then finally, we'll hit that Q&A like we mentioned. So the TCO study on WSUS and SCCM, we did this in conjunction with Sedulo Group. It's a total cost of ownership study for Microsoft Windows Server Update Services and System Center Configuration Manager, better known as WSUS and SCCM. The study compares those two to the Automox platform. The study finds that patch management is a critical function since patches ensure that systems are running at optimal levels and safeguarded against exploitation. Today, multiple patch management solutions exist that provide answers to the challenge of patching corporate endpoints and systems. Although we will see that selecting a patch management system is not easy. There are several hidden costs relating to required hardware, software, licensing, training, personnel, and much more that the study dives into. The study also finds that large organizations are commonly more impacted than smaller organizations by these hidden costs, as they significantly increase total cost of ownership over time and affect purchase decisions. Many companies have strict processes to procure software, and the factors surrounding many patch management platforms can slow or impede acquisitions and patching. Additionally, costs stemming from unplanned scenarios, such as a sudden shift to remote-based workforces, or labor costs to repair system damage from breaches resulting from the misuse of corporate VPNs, for example, will all factor into the TCO. The Sedulo analysis suggests that these common factors should be considered when weighing legacy on-premise systems versus SaaS-based platforms. Given the ability of SaaS-based patch platforms to reduce the impact from unplanned expenses, companies may achieve greater cost savings by selecting a SaaS-based platform. In the analysis, Sedulo Group explores the TCO of the three platforms and analyzes several factors that impact TCO and defines what to expect when purchasing or owning these platforms. So diving into it, we're going to first kind of talk a little about what is WSUS and SCCM. We'll start with WSUS. WSUS is often an easy enough, cheap enough option for centralizing your patch management, and most organizations that have a large Windows population within their infrastructure will tend to go with WSUS as their first formalized patching solution. WSUS features, like I said, centralized patching. It has some basic device grouping and targeting options and some basic patch approval options. So it really kind of introduces you to the idea of managing and orchestrating your patching across your organization. Typically, WSUS starts to show its cracks around 500 devices. Users of WSUS tend to be very price sensitive, and WSUS really only excels in Windows only or Windows centric shops. There are options that allow you to extend Windows server update services to handle both Linux and Mac, but those do cost additional on top of what you would normally be paying already just for your WSUS server. Some of the benefits, organizations can save bandwidth by aggregating patch software on a single source for internal distribution. The WSUS server acts as that single point. This prevents each endpoint from reaching out to the internet to download updates individually, and causes you to consume less valuable company resources and prevents bottlenecking from happening during patch days on the ingress egress point for your organization's bandwidth. WSUS also provides enhanced reporting capabilities over just Windows automatic updates, and this allows administrators to target specific sets of computers for distribution for ease of deployment and better optimization of time and resources. But that's kind of where the benefits of WSUS end. Some of the drawbacks that WSUS has is that it requires a VPN to support remote machines. WSUS was built with a more old school mentality in mind, where you would have a centralized server within your building, within or on your intranet, and it served the devices in that building. As we move to more remote workforces or highly geographically segmented organizations, this starts to kind of fall on its face. So WSUS, like I said, it requires a VPN to support those remote machines. So the machines would connect to the VPN, call back to the WSUS server, and get their patches. This can really put a lot of stress on your VPNs. And additionally, WSUS really provides little granularity beyond standard Windows automatic updates. It's basically there to limit the bandwidth impact. Additionally, it does not support third-party operating systems, software inventory management, or multiple management views. It also doesn't support patch testing or verification. It has no real controls for policies, and detailed information for enrolled assets is just not as robust as you would hope. And then it lacks some of the typical MDM capabilities, like supporting mobile devices or IoT. So all in all, WSUS is a good option for some Windows-centric organizations looking to kind of dip their toes into patch management. But as we'll kind of show you, it is a slippery slope that can start to cost the organizations significant amounts of money as they mature. So moving on to SCCM, SCCM really is the big brother to WSUS. It really is where you start to have enterprise endpoint management capabilities embedded in a Microsoft endpoint management tool. Like WSUS, it has the centralized patching controls, it has some basic device grouping and some basic patch approvals, but it also layers on asset inventory, OS deployment, third-party application patching, although we'll get into a little bit about that. Scripting, endpoint protection management, so it can set your firewall rules, it can set your endpoint protection rules, and then configuration management. Typically, SCCM users are organizations with at least 1,000 devices. It also helps with users who are geographically spread. SCCM, although it does have some limitations around individual remote devices, it does serve well for organizations that have many offices. And typically, it's still SCCM users tend to be Windows only or very Windows centric shop. And then the biggest thing of note for a typical SCCM user is you will start to see the advent of specialized SCCM admin employees at the organizations. So some of the benefits of SCCM, like due to the fact that it's so tightly integrated with the Windows operating system, SCCM can provide a lot of features such as virtual desktop management that are unavailable in other management suites. Additionally, SCCM licensing can be bundled with other Microsoft costs that companies may already be purchasing, creating potential opportunity for discounting. We do see a lot of customers that get SCCM for free, the actual box itself. That being said, there are a lot of additional hidden costs to that box that we actually covered last month, and we'll kind of cover a little bit today as well. Some of the drawbacks, again, SCCM requires internet to support remote machines. This is the same issue as WSUS. Without a VPN for those machines to call back on, they really can't easily get patched and stay up to date. It is not a cloud-enabled tool unless it's integrated with Microsoft Intune, which requires further licensing and administrative overhead. The Intune integration also doesn't really extend full SCCM capabilities. It just allows SCCM to be managed from the cloud. So you still have all the same problems that you would have with an on-prem VPN. SCCM is also bulky and cumbersome. It requires extensive Microsoft team experience to deploy and maintain, and that's what we'll kind of get into. It is a bear to really maintain an SCCM instance. So what really goes into the TCO? There are actually, 6 main components that go into the TCO, but then within each of these, there are numerous subcategories that are called out within the report. They can range from costly on-prem hardware and software all the way to specialized administrators. Like SCCM is riddled with hidden costs, including licensing fees for databases, hardware deployment requirements, skilled labor, professional services, and more. Geographically spread or large organizations that do not have an infrastructure where most managed hosts are network adjacent will suffer the most from these additional costs. The burden of upkeep for SCCM servers results in massive overhead, burdening large organizations and proving to be too taxing for smaller organizations who often remain non-compliant due to the technical and logistical challenges of patching with SCCM. Unlike SCCM and WSUS, Automox is capable of easily scaling with both remote and on-premise environments without a shift in deployment technique or other costly labor or software changes. Automox's pricing is much more straightforward and allows customers to easily plan and scale without unforeseen costs or changes associated with hardware support or other components. Unlike previous TCO calculations that have been done for SCCM and WSUS, Sedulo Group went into much greater detail, accounting for workstations, servers, physical topography of the organizations, deployment costs, hosting costs, software, training, manual updating, labor, licensing, just everything you can imagine has been put into this study. So what does this actually look like? Well, for a typical 10,000 endpoint deployment, we actually see SCCM coming in at about 6.6 million in total cost of ownership over 5 years. That includes a very heavy first year lift of $1.8 million. When we compare that to Automox, we see we see the benefits of SaaS, where you really have a very predictable yearly cost for ongoing maintenance and running the actual system of only $891,000. So over the same 5-year span, Automox only costs about $4.45 million. That is a significant, almost a third drop in total cost of ownership for the two solutions. Some of the things that kind of go into this is the fact that implementation is a huge burden for SCCM. You have new hardware, new software that needs to be deployed on that, as well as scaling your VPNs and scaling your network infrastructure to support SCCM. Additionally, as the tool runs over time, you also have additional costs compared to a SaaS solution of maintaining the hardware and maintaining the software. So, for example, on your WSUS or SCCM server, you have not only SCCM or WSUS running on that server, but you also will have the license costs associated with securing that server. So putting your endpoint protection, additional costs for firewall, additional costs for any sort of management software that you have on that server. That all builds up over time. There's a little bit of a price break in the mid years for SCCM, but by the time you get to year 5, you're typically hitting the average hardware refresh cycle for organizations. And so in year 5, you'll have the cost of decommissioning, and then moving into year 6, you'll actually have a very similar implementation cost as you had in the first year of about, anywhere from $1.2 to $1.8 million to refresh the hardware, redeploy, and resupport that. These are all things that are not present in a SaaS service. A SaaS service puts the onus on Automox to maintain the tool, and we do a very good job of maintaining that on AWS, and we have all the best security and the best implementation practices to ensure high availability and continuous access to your instance. So that really kind of describes the baseline total cost of ownership for SCCM versus Automox. But like I said, we're going to be kind of focusing on managing remote teams because that's a pretty common issue for our customers today. And so this is really where things start to go south for SCCM and WSUS. So when we look at the actual total cost of ownership, the additional costs for the scenario of unplanned remote work, which Sedulo Group dug in on and found a lot of information and a lot of research around this, we find a staggering difference in the total cost of ownership. And really, with more organizations moving toward a remote workforce, there are these associated costs, both monetary and resource allocation terms. These unforeseen expenditures may result in severe budget disruptions if they're not planned for given high costs. For example, given the high costs associated with VPN misuse and remediation. Organizations are not stagnant entities, so unexpected growth, which requires both quick and efficient scaling, needs to be accounted for to really fully understand what your total cost of ownership will be for these two different patching solutions. These scaling events include training, security, supportive connectivity, which all increase an organization's relative cost per employee. New work from home policies translate into critical requirements for businesses to secure these remote endpoints, laptops, and VPNs. A fully automated SaaS patch management solution like Automox not only provides the most up-to-date software without the need for VPN use, but it also does so at a much lower overall cost to an organization. In Sedulo's reports, TCO analysis, the costs associated with unplanned remote work consists of both VPN costs and what they define as a single disaster recovery event. Using the model outlined in the TCO cost calculation methodology, this translates into a cost of approximately $354,000 for both WSUS and SCCM users, whereas Automox only incurs about $10,000 in expense for a similar unplanned disaster recovery event, as there is no need to purchase VPN subscriptions for employees to gain access to routine updates. What they're really getting at here is that Automox can scale very quickly worldwide with no requirement or no expectation of changing your VPN. For SCCM or WSUS, you have a pretty significant outlay to increase VPN bandwidth just to handle the additional remote workers. Subsequent analysis of the model revealed that ongoing maintenance costs associated with the three platforms remains consistent once the initial purchase is made. However, costs between the platforms vary at both the initial purchase and when decommissioning. Sedulo finds that Automox delivers a cloud-native patch management platform. This means that there are no servers to buy, no software to manage, and no training to attend. This architectural model significantly improves the outcomes in terms of scalability and flexibility for customers. Network borders no longer present a major concern, and scaling is as simple as purchasing additional licenses. As the requirements for policy management, automated controls, and native third-party patching shift from a single local to a geographically dispersed model, including remote workforces, it begins to stress the traditional architectures of patch management systems like WSUS and SCCM. With Automox, other factors that become less of an issue include extraneous equipment and connection requirements. If the users have a reliable internet connection, they can receive management commands. A company attempting to scale a remote workforce using a solution such as SCCM would have to contend with VPN implementation, costs, and the maintenance of those services, as well as the latency introduced by having users tethered to a single region. To mitigate this, a company might attempt to cluster or load balance across regions. This approach begins to significantly increase costs as the need for hardware, software, connections, and labor double and triple. Simply put, a cloud-delivered solution such as Automox is the only viable, scalable, and cost-effective option for businesses needing to adapt their patch management strategy to the challenge of a remote workforce. So let's move on and talk a little bit about cloud-based patching value and benefits. It's simple, really. Automox is a globally available cloud-native cyber hygiene service. Like any other critical SaaS function, the ongoing maintenance and security for remote work fleets is best serviced through highly scalable and always connected cloud services. After all, remote workers are always connected to the internet, just not necessarily to the corporate network. By making a secure, globally scaled SaaS service always available to them, organizations can maintain continuous visibility and control. The Automox platform is designed to treat remote endpoints as equals, providing organizations equal visibility control, whether dealing with remote endpoints or on-premise machines. And really, this is what when we talk about a cloud native management console, what that means is that it's available not only to the admins worldwide 24 hours a day, but it's also available to connect worldwide 24 hours a day to any endpoints worldwide with no requirement for a VPN, no requirement for a gateway connection to that device. Through the agent connection, we can actually just have a simple automated patching configuration system set up that's low maintenance. And ultimately, because of that, we're able to manage endpoints from the cloud worldwide remotely with no additional costs associated. So we talked a little bit about the TCO of SCCM versus Automox, and how Automox, year after year is a consistent 891,000, and the TCO of SCCM fluctuates. But really, what this means is that both services are able to do the same job at the end of the day in terms of patch management. And really, what we can now surface is the total unrecoverable costs of on-prem patching. So in the first year, we have a very large amount, 974,000, more than double what it costs. To implement and use Automox in the first year. And this is due, like we said, to the large amount of hardware and infrastructure and training that's required to support SCCM. And then year over year, we have additional more than 300,000 in unrecoverable costs. Ultimately, this leads to a total unrecoverable cost of using SCCM of about $2.2 million over 5 years, or only $36,717 per month of unrecoverable costs. And these costs really are representative of a typical approximately 10,000 endpoint organization with 3 offices. As you have additional offices or additional remote employees, this number scales up very quickly, and the cost differential between the two solutions starts to diverge very, very fast. So what does this really mean? Well, this means that your organization, if you're using SCCM today, is throwing away $36,000 per month approximately for every 10,000 endpoints that you have. Think about the different places that you could better apply that money than spending on the operational costs of maintaining your on-prem patching solution. And so really what this comes down to is the total cost of ownership for WSUS and SCCM, $6.6 million for a 10,000 endpoint deployment over 5 years. That's $1.8 million alone in just upfront costs to deploy the two to serve 6 office locations. That comes out to $9.97 total cost per endpoint per month for only ongoing maintenance. That's not including the actual deployment. When you actually factor in the deployment costs over those 5 years, it pushes that average monthly cost per endpoint to a little over $11 per endpoint. That means that there's $3.58 in unrecoverable cost per endpoint per month for on-prem patching solutions like WSUS and SCCM, or approximately 32.5% of your operational expenditures are being wasted on just maintaining SCCM and WSUS. I think that is a very compelling reason to consider a SaaS solution to help reduce your total cost. Solutions like Automox can show an immense amount of value for organizations worldwide. So let's talk about reducing your costs today with Automox. You have some very easy things you can start to recoup costs on by moving to a cloud SaaS solution, including up to 38 hours per week just deploying updates. Most organizations that we've polled average about 38 hours per week just manually deploying updates to systems, whether or not they have a solution like SCCM or WSUS or not. We can also help you reduce your costly on-prem hardware and software costs. No more hosting your own WSUS or SCCM server. No more having to secure those servers. No more having to maintain those servers. And then additionally, SCCM especially is a very heavy burden to lift for IT organizations. It typically requires 40 hours of training per employee in your IT organization just to bring them up to speed on WSUS, but not to really become a true expert on it. Like, these are 3 costs alone that you can start to save today that will greatly reduce your total operational costs. So like I said, WSUS and SCCM and Automox each perform patch management, but we have separate areas of strengths and capabilities. SCCM and Automox are the more robust options with extended feature sets and capabilities that go beyond simple patch management what you would have in WSUS. For example, SCCM can aid in OS deployment, allowing company resources to be spent elsewhere. Automox, on the other hand, delivers automation and PowerShell and Bash scripting across all your organization, not only Windows, but Mac and Linux as well. We also offer a rich API across all 3 flavors of OS. And ultimately, really, the unique combination of features and future-proof design and minimal maintenance and support that you get from Automox, as well as the ability to patch remote devices and hybrid infrastructure, are the primary advantages to Automox. Customers seeking a high-value solution with peak return on investment for cybersecurity hygiene and automated patch management should look at Automox as their next solution. So, like I said, why Automox? We're cloud native, we're cross-platform. There's nothing to maintain, we have broad coverage, and we're always in reach. No requirement for VPN, no requirement to phone into your corporate network to get your patches. We can ensure that your organization is up to date everywhere across your organization, regardless of OS and regardless of physical location. We have built-in cyber hygiene fundamentals. By automating your patching, we can show you how you can immediately reduce your exposure to vulnerabilities by 80% or more. We also have extensible automation through worklets. We can customize and automate with no vendor roadmap lock-in, so we can push scripts to PowerShell or through PowerShell or Bash to Windows, Mac, or Linux that'll allow you to do anything that you could think of from a script. We also have straightforward reporting. We can demonstrate risk and compliance to executives and technical stakeholders very quickly using our embedded reports within the platform. And then we also have our community, Automox Alive. We have the knowledge and the content exchange, as well as just a good, fun place to go and chat with other like-minded individuals about your patch management and IT operations. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Q&A. And we're going to take a look through and see what we have to answer. So right off, I see a couple questions on the model. The first one, is the TCO model available for download? It is not. We are currently building that into our website, so you'll be able to actually tinker with the Sedulo Group model firsthand and experiment with it, put into the details for your organization, and we can give you a very clear spit out of exactly how much SCCM or WSUS or Automox would cost your organization from a total cost of ownership standpoint. That is forthcoming. In the meantime, we do have an existing TCO calculator available on the website to use. Next up, what was the TCO model based on? How many endpoints and locations? So the TCO model itself is very flexible. It allows us to change the number of endpoints, the flavor of the endpoints. We can do everything from how many endpoints, how many locations, how many secondary locations, how many remote employees. We can enable 4 different scenarios within the calculator. So that's all very flexible within the calculator. And once we get that stood up on the website, we'll be able to share that out with everyone, and they'll be able to kind of play with the calculator themselves. As far as how many endpoints and locations for the study examples, they used a typical example of about 10,000 endpoints spread across 6 locations with a fairly typical mixture of both workstations and servers. All right, moving on. How do things change in the calculations as you change the number of endpoints and locations? So The model accounts for, I mean, just about everything. So as you add endpoints and as you add remote endpoints, it will automatically scale up the costs for VPN to meet the needs. It also takes into account cost of labor, so we can actually customize the calculator for your individual market or even your individual organization. So we have granular controls over like salary for labor. We have controls over discounting that you might have through Dell. So for example, we use or within the study they used I believe it was Dell for pricing on hardware and server infrastructure. So if you have a specific discount rate with Dell, we can actually input that into the model, and it will update the full model based on that discounting. All right, what else do we have? Who is Sedulo Group? Sedulo Group is an external research firm that Automox worked with to put this study together. We saw a deficiency in the SCCM and WSUS total cost of ownership space. The last real study that was done on this was done, I believe, in 2009. So we felt that 11 years is a little overdue to refresh on that. And so we actually reached out to Sedulo Group and asked them to go ahead and do that refresh. What does the calculation use for prices of equipment and labor costs? Yeah, so like I said before, equipment and labor costs are flexible within the model. We can change those. Sedulo Group used Dell, I believe, since it was a major, easily accessible vendor for most organizations in the US and would represent pretty typical pricing for equipment. As far as labor costs, they pinned that off of the national average, I believe, for SCCM admins. But like we talked about last month, that can fluctuate a lot. Some areas, SCCM admins are as low as $70,000 or $80,000 per year, and in others, the cost for an SCCM admin can top $125,000 to $130,000 per year, and that's not including HR and administrative overhead for those employees. So that is all stuff that you can adjust within the calculator once we stand that up. How does Automox handle remote offices? So that's actually an interesting one. So we actually don't treat a remote office any different than a primary office. As a SaaS solution, we can deliver our services to the endpoint regardless of location. So where SCCM or WSUS might have an issue with a remote office and needing to VPN in, or a remote workforce and needing to VPN in, we actually don't have those requirements. We're able to instead just to reach directly from the cloud console down to the agent on the endpoint and deploy the patches or configurations that are necessary and push policies down via that connection. Does Automox only patch? We use SCCM to manage patching and software deployment. So Automox does more than patch. Patching is our bread and butter, but we also do software deployment and software enforcement, and we also do asset inventory, software inventory, and configuration management and cyber hygiene through scripting. So we do a lot more than just patch. Our office followed the rest of the pack and moved to remote. How well does Automox perform with VPNs? Does it require a VPN, and can it work with a VPN that is on by default? So Automox performs very well without a VPN. That's actually a major strength for a remote workforce, is that we will not bog down your VPN infrastructure. We can patch regardless of whether there's VPN or not. We can work with or without a VPN. So if your organization is using a VPN that's on by default, like you said, we can patch those systems basically like any other. It would just be routing through your VPN. So there may be a little bit of a bandwidth impact on your VPN, but we actually perform exceptionally well without a VPN. We can actually ensure that your endpoints are up to date and maintained without that VPN connection and without the pain that comes with that VPN connection. All right, what else we have? What improvements are coming to Automox next? What can I expect to see? So we're not going to discuss roadmap on this call, but we do have improvements and additional features coming to Automox as we mature and expand our platform. I would recommend that you reach out to your salesperson to get a better insight as to where Automox is going and some of the features and functionality that you'll see in the coming months and year. You said that Automox works for Windows, Mac, and Linux. I know SCCM can do the same. Yeah, you're right, but SCCM can do the same for a lot more money. And that's really where the caveat is. So SCCM can be extended to cover Mac and Linux builds, but typically that requires costly agents from Microsoft or an additional purchase of a third-party tool to layer over your SCCM or WSUS to extend their capabilities to Mac and Linux. And even when you do that, Mac and Linux are second-tier tool or second tier OSs within the SCCM instance. So they really aren't going to get the full breadth of features and functionality that SCCM has to offer for Windows. Automox actually treats all three more or less the same. So we're able to push patches and third-party applications down to all three operating systems. So we're really operating system agnostic. Where is the report available? I'm assuming you're talking about the Sedulo Report. The Sedulo Report is live on our website. You can go there and download it, as well as take a look at the page that we have built for that. But if you were talking about reports within Automox, like like doing compliance or risk reporting, that's actually within the interface. There's a tab on the left side for reports that you can click on to dive into those. What if Automox cloud servers experience an outage or a loss of service? If we have a patch, are we just, or if we have a patch that needs to go out, are we just in trouble? No, you're not in trouble because Automox utilizes AWS and AWS's high availability options. So we actually have multiple instances of the service running at all times. So if one fails, we have a failover that immediately takes its place. So we aim for as high of uptime as we can. And any actual outages, we do communicate to customers when they happen, but they are fairly rare. Can we manually patch? Yes, you can manually patch. We encourage people to automate their patching so they can reduce their operational overhead, but you can manually patch as well. So if you have a system with that has only specific requirements, or that you really need to kind of kid glove, you can do that. Let me see here if there are any other questions. All right, yeah, we got a couple more questions, it looks like. 6.6 million seems really high. Where does that number come from? So that number is fully supported by Sedulo Group's analysis. That number includes everything from the hardware to the network infrastructure to the labor, the software associated with the server. So your CAL licenses, your actual Microsoft server licenses, any security software or management software you might have to deploy onto that system. So although 6.6 million seems high, it's actually not very far off for the total cost of ownership expectation for a pretty robust software like SCCM for a mid to large size organization. And keep in mind that also that is over 5 years. So it's it's a little bit over $1.3 million per year on average. Where can I get the report, and can I share it with my colleagues? The report, like I said before, it's available on the website now. And yes, you can share it with your colleagues. We encourage you to show it to everybody. We'd love for people to get educated on SCCM and WSUS total cost of ownership. Why is the remote workforce difference in cost so extreme for SCCM versus Automox? Yeah, so that question I believe is specifically talking to like why is it only $10,000 extra for Automox versus $350,000 extra for SCCM when you have the what Sedulo called the disaster recovery event. And what Sedulo did was they modeled the sudden shift to remote workforces in much the same way that a disaster recovery might be modeled. So you have a very short period of time to shift your organization to fully remote. That includes getting the additional infrastructure in place for VPNs, as well as expanding out the reach of SCCM. So for Automox, it's so low because there's so little. Really, you're talking about additional licenses if you have additional devices you want to cover that from a remote standpoint. And you really have not a lot of additional operational expenditures. So for Automox, you just, like we said, we treat every endpoint as if it's within your organization anyhow, because it's a SaaS service. We can reach out regardless of location. It's a much different story for SCCM. All right, next question. Do you plan to do a similar report for ManageEngine? Not at this point. However, I think there are some, once you look at the TCO calculator as we debut that, as well as you can read the report itself, ManageEngine is an on-prem solution. So a lot of the same issues that you would run into with SCCM and WSUS in terms of total cost of ownership are going to be issues that you'll run into with ManageEngine as well. So at this point, no, we do not plan to do a similar report on ManageEngine, but I think there are corollaries that you can draw between the two solutions. What are CALs? CALs, that's a Microsoft term. It's a client access license. So CALs range from a couple dollars a piece to a few dollars a piece per year. But they're basically a license that allows a Microsoft Windows box to connect to a Microsoft Windows Server box. It's one of the extremely difficult licensing things to deal with Microsoft. Almost everybody is out of compliance with CALs. Usually when I hear somebody say, well, no, we understand CALs fully, it's like, well, no, you're going to get a nasty bill from Microsoft in the future. They're frustrating to deal with. They're complex and they can be extremely costly. Is Automox fully cloud, or can we deploy Automox on-prem or in a hybrid role? So Automox is a fully cloud solution. So we're cloud native, which means we're built on the cloud only. There are on-prem components that you could deploy. So we actually can work with a WSUS server. So if you want to try to reduce your bandwidth usage, we can work with an existing WSUS to help reduce that a little bit. But we don't have a way to deploy Automox on-prem. Does the model support MSPs to model Automox versus Microsoft? No, that was a level of complexity that we didn't want to dive into. The model, although it doesn't directly support MSPs for modeling the total cost of ownership, you could probably use a lot of the data that's available within both the model and the report to draw the conclusions that you need to really get a good estimate of the total cost of ownership for the two from an MSP perspective. We do have some use cases with MSPs that feel free to reach out to the salespeople and discuss with them. They'd be glad to support you and talk about Automox versus Microsoft anytime. With that, I think we're about out of time. Thank you everybody for joining today. Please follow Automox on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Spiceworks. We look forward to the next event in this TCO series. Thank you for joining us today.